Hey everybody, I'm here to tell you who is more anti-science. Is it the proponents of anthropological global warming or climate science alarm, or is it the skeptics? Now, you would think that the people who are the proponents of climate science would be the most pro-science people, not the most anti-science, because they are literally promoting science. They're proponents of science. They say science is right. They side with the majority of science on climate science. So that sounds pretty pro-science, right? It would be hard to argue that point. But argue it I will, because that's what YouTube's for, right? So here's the argument that says that the people who are pro-climate science are anti-science, actually. The first part of the argument is that if you're not talking about the scientists themselves, here I'm talking about the public. If you say that you believe what the scientists are telling you, you're not believing science, you're believing the people who told you. Now, whether they're right or wrong, the fact is you're not believing science, you're one level away from science. You're simply believing human beings, right? So if you believe human beings and you think that you're involved in science, I hate to disappoint you, because you're actually just listening to people. And people can be right or wrong, and they can be compatible with science or not, but people aren't science. If all you're doing is listening to people, even if they all agree, it's still just listening to people. That's not really science. All right, the scientists are doing the real science. Secondly, when the consensus changes, as it did, let's take the example of evolution. It is not uncommon for the minority to be the right ones and the majority to be in the wrong. It just takes a while for the majority to shift over. When Einstein first came out with his ideas on everything, relativity, light, you name it, it took a while for people to catch on. So the people in the minority were right for a fairly long time. So if you said to me, I side with the scientists largely because there are so many of them on the same side, whether that's 95% or 80%, it's all kind of the same. It doesn't matter. You're still ignoring the possibility, not the probability. I can't put any kind of likelihood on it, but you're ignoring at least the possibility that the people who are right are the ones who always go first. So a normal situation is that the people who are right, in the case where a consensus is going to change, are in the minority for a while until the rest of you catch up. So that's a possibility. Now, if you're judging climate science by how many people are on one side and their credentials, you probably think, well, that's just common sense. But I think common sense is largely a hallucination. Humans don't really have common sense. And you can easily demonstrate that by the fact that there are humans with all kinds of different religions. There are very smart people in every religion. There are smart people on every political side. So smart people are all over the board. And they all have, they believe, common sense. So if common sense doesn't get smart people who have the right information to the same decision, what is it exactly? What good is it? So I think common sense is overrated. I think voting with the majority is dangerous, because sometimes it's just, you're just seeing before the shift. So if you were trying to convince me in a scientifically, let's say, rational way, that I should believe that climate science is going to kill us all, the minimum stuff that I would want to know to convince me would be, can you tell me what percentage of the change is because of humans? Because we know that some of it is natural, or probably natural because there are natural cycles. So if you don't know what percentage it is, I'm not sure what you know. Because if it's 10%, maybe I don't care. If it's 90%, of course I care. If it's 40%, maybe I still care a lot, right? But if you don't know what it is, I have to scratch my head about that. All right. But what I'd really like to know is the number of people who have changed sides in the last 5 years, specifically climate scientists. All right. If you looked at the 5 years, and by the way, I don't know if this information exists, but it's the only thing that would convince me, and it seems like we could find that information. How many people have been skeptics but had the right credentials for climate science, and then after they looked at enough stuff said, all right, I was a skeptic, but now I'm really scared. We've got a lot of problems here. Humans are causing too much warming. Compared to the number of people who are climate scientists, I'll say believers, or they bought into the major consensus claims. How many of them moved to the other side and said, man, once you look into this stuff, it falls apart? I don't know the answer to that question. But isn't it the only one that matters? If you're trying to convince somebody, don't you want to know which direction things are moving? Because if the direction is moving towards skepticism, then the fact that there are few of them so far doesn't mean much. What would mean a lot more is if there are more of them coming, right? Just like it doesn't matter how many immigrants are in the country, it kind of matters how fast they're coming in. That's all that matters. All right, so if you're on the side that says, I'm going to use my common sense and my non-scientific brain because I'm just a citizen, I'm not a scientist, and I'm going to dig into the science and I'm going to figure it out on my own with my common sense, and by the way, I'm going to look at how many scientists there are and I'm going to agree with them. You think you're doing science, or maybe you think you're compatible with science, or maybe you think, I don't know, but none of that's science. All it is using your common sense, which is an illusion, and trusting people who are undependable. And if you're counting the number of people who have the right credentials, I would say that's less important than the flow. Who's moving from skepticism to belief or belief to skepticism? Which direction is dominant right now? And I don't know the answer to that, by the way. The next thing you have to look at is, are there other fields of science that would contradict climate science? And one of them that you at least have to be familiar with, and it's one that I know a little bit more about, is cognitive science. And cognitive science does a pretty good job of explaining how you could have a lot of smart people completely under a hallucination, a delusion. What cognitive scientists know that maybe the rest of the world doesn't know, and even other scientists don't know, is that these illusions are so common that they're all around us all the time, and we're just so used to them that we don't see the world as a bunch of illusions. That's sort of what's happening. You're living in a world where some people believe they reincarnated from a Tibetan monk, and some people believe their prophet flew to heaven on a horse. Some people believe Jesus walked on water. Many different beliefs. The only thing you can know for sure is they're not all right? If one of them is right, the other people are sort of wrong on some of the big stuff. All right. So cognitive science knows that people can be deluded, and smart people who have all the information, they can be deluded easily. So the fact that a lot of people are on one side should not give you a high degree of confidence about anything. In general, I'm not talking about climate science, but just in general, if you were someone who knows about climate or cognitive science, you would have a lot less credibility that you would put in any group of people, even scientists. All right. Now, within scientists, within the group who are climate scientists, that's not the biggest group of scientists in the world, but within that group, how many of them have done a deep dive in the entire field? Because it seems to me it's probably a really big field with lots of corners and a lot of depth. How many of the climate scientists have actually done it all, hands-on, done their own original research in every part of it, from measurement to the basic science to building these models that predict? Who's been deeply involved in all of it? There are probably a few people, but not many. So if you're looking at counting the number of people on one side, it's probably a smaller number than you think who know enough to really have an informed choice. There must be plenty of other climate scientists who are experts at their little field, but really don't have personal exposure, haven't read all the papers about the rest of the stuff. So when climate scientists say they agree, they're mostly agreeing with other people. They're not agreeing with science exactly. They've looked at the science, they've looked at the peer review. This is all good stuff and important and it helps. But there's still a part where they're kind of trusting that their associate got some stuff right? For the most part. So I would say that, let me give you my own bottom line on climate science. I think the basic science is probably right. I think that humans are contributing to warming. I think we probably don't know how much, and we certainly don't know how much it's going to change the world and in what rate and what type. One possibility is, and I'm not saying this is likely, I'm just saying that the future is unpredictable, and this is an example. It could be that we need climate change to mess up the world so that there's enough work for humans, because the age of robots is going to be taking a lot of jobs. And we might need something like a major disaster just to keep people employed once the robots start doing all the good stuff. And we might want to use those robots to really reconfigure society. We might want to invent new technology that can terraform our world and keep the climate in check and stop hurricanes. And we might develop that because of climate change. So it's an unpredictable future. And while it might be true that humans are doing too much to warm the earth, it's hard for me to say that that's necessarily a bad thing. Maybe we grow more food because of the warm. Maybe it creates jobs. Maybe it makes it much better weather in some places. Maybe it stops some droughts. Who knows? But humans are pretty good about adapting to stuff, so I'm not too worried about wiping us out. So that's where I stand. I don't think the predictions are terribly accurate, especially the predictions about the impact on humanity. Those who say, hey, but Pascal's wager, if there's any chance, even a small chance, that climate change is going to wipe out, some part of humanity, don't you have to treat it as if it's a certainty? You want to get rid of all risks of that size. It's like the nuclear weapon, problem. Just one problem could wipe out, half the country. So I would say the problem with that is you have to put it in context. You are surrounded by things that could kill you if something went wrong, and there's a pretty good chance that it will. Every time you get in a car, there's a pretty good chance that's going to go terribly wrong. And we can't really solve everything down to zero risk. We can't prevent the asteroid that's 100 light years away or whatever from hitting Earth. We could put trillions of dollars into it, and maybe we could take a run at it just in case there's an asteroid coming toward the Earth. But which is more important? Asteroid? Climate science? I think you would say that climate science has greater odds of being a problem, and that's completely fair. But there are all kinds of things that could be problems, and we don't manage to the worst case of every virus outbreak, every potential for terrorism. We just don't manage to zero risk. And climate science probably is no different in that sense. It's going to affect lots of parts of the world in different ways, and it's not all going to happen at once. We probably can figure this out. Worst case scenario, humans are pretty good at figuring stuff out. I call this the Adam's law of slow-moving disasters. The idea is that when humans see things coming a long ways in the future, we're really good at adjusting in advance. We nipped that year 2000 bug before it became a problem, even though it looked impossible at one point. We didn't run out of food like lots of people thought we would, 100 years ago. We didn't run out of oil. We're just pretty good at figuring stuff out. So I'm not too worried about the future of humanity, but I am uncertain about the details of climate science. And if you think that you can use your non-scientific brain, your complete lack of access to the fundamental science, and use your common sense to figure out who's right and who's wrong and who's more scientific and who's not, the only thing I can say for sure is you're not very scientific. All right, that's all for today.